I don't know if I need that. Let's see. I had a pretty loud and booming voice. Yesterday, I taught in Matan in the tent. We have an outdoor tent, and there was construction behind me and a lawnmower to the right of me, and I had to scream over all the noise, and we couldn't go inside because people have a lot of older students. Okay, for sure. Although I'll feel very intro, so if they can't hear me, then okay. Well, make sure they can hear you. That's important. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put that up there. Until I share the screen. Okay, start handing it. Should I hand the thing? Okay. Guys, ladies.
Hey, Sandy, you made it in?
I did, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Get it on my computer because it says I haven't got
From
WhatsApp.
now on, will you send me stuff by, I want it in an email, not on the
It's
phone.
not very good on the phone.
What is that?
The phone and I don't get along.
WhatsApp? We don't have
We're
WhatsApp.
loud enough, okay? Or if we need the microphone,
We'll talk later.
okay? I'm not gonna take up.
These are
Yes.
No, where's the speaker?
Wait, you have to come where they can.
She started talking yet? No.
Okay. Is that a problem?
You good?
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody here, and I'd like to welcome Rabbanit Karen. We are really privileged to have her here with us. She's a fabulous teacher, which you will all soon know yourselves. So just a few words before we begin. Last week's Parsha, the commandment of donating half a shekel by every member of Bnei Israel was discussed. Moshe was concerned and doubted the meaning behind such a small amount. What could be substantive by such a small, it shows Moshe an image of a shekel, a coin of fire all about. What does this mean and how does this answer the question? Hashem is explaining to Moshe that he's not measuring the amounts that people give, but rather the passion. Hashem is examining our willingness to give. Hashem wants to measure our spiritual giving and our level of enthusiasm. So why the half and not a full coin? The half physical shekel represents the spiritual half. The fire image shows Moshe is the passion of the soul uplifting the physical. I have no doubt that each of us tonight and over the next few weeks will walk away with something very tangible, something practical and useful that will provide us with a stronger connection to the Master of the universe. We will learn the origins of Tefillah, the meaning of our intention in Tefillah, and being mindful with gratitude. I am excited, and I invite Karen to get the show started.
Give it her own talk.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. You on Zoom can see me, right? And hear me? Everything good here? You guys can hear? Okay, thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, everyone has a sheet, and if you're on Zoom, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. You'll be able to look at the source sheet, and I believe also Shoshana sent and Michelle sent to the WhatsApp group the source sheet. Okay, I have to say it's interesting when Corona came into the world. When we were hit with Corona, we then in my teaching we went quickly to Zoom, and then everything was on Zoom. And you know, Zoom is a certain amount of multitasking in and of itself. I don't know if any of you are teachers and have experience managing a Zoom. And this year, because of all the different perspectives on how much people want to be live, how much people want to be cautious, I've been teaching on hybrid, what they call hybrid. So you have people, which is exactly what we're doing here. People in front of you, people on Zoom, a source sheet, a real source sheet, a source sheet on the laptop. So it's taking multitasking to a whole nother level. So
I'll check them. I then put the Amidah on so that I wouldn't be.
I also know how to mute people. I can't mute you though.
I really, first of all, want to begin by thanking Shoshana and her team for organizing this and all of you for coming out. I know that as women in particular, our lives are very busy and hectic, and it's wonderful to also take time for ourselves and explore and get in touch with just taking that time to also develop ourselves, develop our souls. And really that's an element of Tefillah. So hopefully that's part of what we'll be doing here. Before I begin to jump into some ideas, two things. One is I want to say that I really don't like to just lecture. I really love interaction. So please feel free when you feel inspired to share something, please share with us, or if you have thoughts and questions. I want to, in particular, thank our sponsors, and we have a couple of people to mention. First of all, thank you to Ricky Balsam, who is a sponsor in memory of her great parents, Faye and Morty Lloyd, who lived the words of Tefillah every single day. Ricky, are you? Oh, okay. I see Ricky. Hi. And Denise. I meant to, hi. Denise Bernstein, thank you. And Daniel and Kayla Brody and family dedicated to the worm community of Iriamim. Definitely, I have not been getting out of Ra'anana enough over the past 2 years, so it's great. Thank you for pulling me out. Okay. So before we jump, one more introduction, which is that I think prayer has a lot of, people have a lot of feelings about prayer, some positive, some negative. I think even more so women have a whole nother layer of challenges. I mean, men have their own challenges with prayer and women have their own challenges with prayer. And so I really want this to be a comfortable space. And I think everyone is sort of approaching this wherever they are. And we're going to be thinking about that, especially tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the origins, the sources. Where does prayer, Jewish prayer, originate from? I believe so. Yes, it is. It's recording to the clouds. I hope we'll find it later. Okay, so we come to prayer with a lot of, especially as adults, with all sorts of baggage, experience, some positive, some negative. And so, thank you. And so I want to start by asking you, just to give you a couple of minutes to express what is your association with prayer, and feel free to say anything. And we'll start with people live, and then I'll give people on Zoom a moment to participate as well. What is your association with prayer? Why pray? So one of those two questions, either why does one pray? Why do you pray? And what is the association, the word or feeling you associate with prayer? So feel free to. And there's really no right or wrong answer. And say your name. Sima, right?
I think it connects me to a higher sphere, and that's a very calming moment.
Okay. Okay, so Seema's saying it connects her to a higher sphere, which is calming. Beautiful. Thankfulness and gratitude, which is something we're going to talk about in week 2, definitely. What's your name? Ayala.
Desperation.
Wow.
I mean, I never enjoyed traveling when I went to religious school, but it's only like in those moments where you just desperate, like, I should help me, that I found myself.
Amazing. So Ayala is saying something different than we've heard so far and really insightful. And I'm gonna say to you that you're very much like the Ramban, Nachmanides, a great Jewish commentator. So you'll see why by the end of today.
Can I say something?
Yes, I'm just going to repeat. Ayala said that she feels that it's from a place of desperation. Prayer can be from a place of desperation, and that she didn't always have positive feelings about prayer growing up. And you go to it when you need it. And so we're going to talk about that as well. Yes, Ricky.
Because there are no atheists in a foxhole. You know, that's really, sometimes it's not just desperation, because you can also go to Tefillah regularly. But then when you feel at a loss sometimes, or you're looking for answers, I think that the person that you're looking to may not be just your friend, your husband, or your neighbor. I really believe that that God that we believe in, if we do believe in God, is the person that will eventually show us the way. Like there really is a way of teaching with Tefillah.
Okay, so definitely this is another aspect. You mentioned a few words which are going to be significant tonight: the fixed and also the time of need. And so that's also a balance that we are searching for, and that we have different personalities, right? And some people, if you're like me, love routine, and when routine is disrupted, it's very disorienting. And you like routine, but then other people prefer the spontaneity, the letting things flow, and not being bound by schedule. And these are challenges and advantages of prayer. I see another hand up on Zoom, Valerie.
Is this similar to Tehillim? You know, when you do Tehillim, when you say Tehillim prayer, similar to that, because that makes you feel good when you say Tehillim.
Yes, so reciting Psalms is a whole nother, it's an interesting thing because that's not required, and there's a lot of flexibility. You can choose one you identify with, and it tends to be the thing we say when, God forbid, someone's sick or having surgery, or in time of God forbid, war. So yes, that definitely fits with the Ayala model as well. Although there's some people who say it every day. Hi, sorry, Anna.
I think prayer is also something that we do consciously or subconsciously when we need to access more possible.
Wow, you guys are saying such insightful things. Yes, say it louder.
I'm saying I think prayer is also something that when we're looking to access deeper parts of ourselves, we turn to consciously or subconsciously.
Okay, so for the friends on Zoom, prayer is also a way to access deeper parts of ourselves, either consciously or unconsciously, and we're going to see that is in the sources as well. Yes, say your name.
I think that what's peaceful about prayer to me is that I know that I'm not in charge, and that there's a higher source who is in charge, and it really takes a lot of burden and stress off of me, knowing that I'm done the best I could in a situation, and the rest is prayer, knowing that it's a God that's going to take care of me, whichever way, and I have to trust that it's going to be the best way. So for me, like, it really calms me, makes me feel more peaceful, knowing that it's not like all on my back.
Yes.
But also, it's just like it really connects you to your higher self, like Anna said.
Yes.
It's like, you find out parts of you that didn't know you had.
Yes.
You're connecting to like a higher self.
Yes. Yes, Esther's pointing out that it also is a way to reinforce faith in God, feeling like not everything is in our control, and being able to turn to God when we need to, definitely, and also connecting with ourselves. Okay, so what do you say? We jump in. We're not going to be doing too much reading. We're going to take things bit by bit. You guys said a lot of things tonight, and this question of why pray is also the title of a talk, which if you have a lot of time, I recommend. There's a beautiful talk by Elie Wiesel many years ago that he used to give lectures, if anyone's from America and is familiar with the 92nd Street Y, I know Shoshana knows, which was this sort of very pluralistic Jewish space. And Elie Wiesel gave this beautiful talk about, he would speak every year often, and he gave this beautiful talk about why pray, which really he embodies, I think, the most extreme example of someone who can talk about this in a good way, extreme, someone who survived the Holocaust and saw the horrors of the Holocaust, and his big question was, how do I still pray after that? And it's a really beautiful talk. So if you're interested, I'm happy to send the link on the to Shoshana, who will pass it on to the WhatsApp. But that question of why pray is something, even on a day-to-day basis, and in today's world, there's just so, and the past year or two has shaken us up as a Jewish community, because everything which was sort of rote and standard suddenly was taken. So, the feeling of, if you're, mostly men going to minyan, going to synagogue every morning, or on Shabbat, all these things, and women who go weekly or whenever, suddenly this was totally shaken up. And people, I think that pause gave people a moment to reflect on, well, one second, what is prayer for me? And so I'm finding that as I talk to people, this is something where people are super, really thinking about more than before. So we're going to look at the first source, which I think the question is, how far back does prayer go? So if you think about the Bible, now how far back? Now prayer as we know it today, you go to synagogue and you open the Siddur, that it wasn't always like that. And we're going to see today a little bit of development. And so what happened, who was the first one to pray? Okay, beautiful. So one answer is Hannah. The truth is there's many answers. Hannah, who else was the first one to pray? Yitzchak, excellent. Isaac. Abraham, excellent. They all in some ways are firsts, okay? And we're not going to talk about Hannah today, but we are going to talk about her later on in the course, in the series. But yes, Abraham, Isaac, who else? Okay, so beautiful. So did Adam, did the first person, the first man pray? Adam and Eve, did they pray? That's an interesting question. But we see there's a whole slew. Moses, okay, we just had in the Parsha the golden calf, and Moshe prays to save the people. He's a tremendous model of prayer. There's many models of prayer, but it doesn't look like the prayer we do weekly. So we're going to look for a moment. It doesn't actually say that Adam prayed. However, we're going to see that the interpreters tell us that in fact he did. And the way they tell it to us tells us something really powerful about prayer. It says in source 1 in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, when no shrub of the field was yet on earth and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. Now, if you were Rashi or in a biblical, medieval biblical interpreter, you would look at this verse and you would say, this is phrased in a really interesting way. Why does the Torah tell us before the grass sprouted and before things started to grow, the greenery started to grow, God had not yet sent rain, right? It needed rain to grow. And the reason God had not sent rain yet was why? Because there was not yet humankind, to work the land. Now, this is very interesting because God can do whatever God wants. God can make the greenery grow before man's there, and God can bring rain before a man is created. And yet, the Bible phrases this very carefully. The Torah, it's told to us very carefully, which is that there was a reason that God did not make the greenery grow. And the interpreters explain what that is. Okay, Rashi explains in source 2, because God had not caused it to rain. And what is the reason that God had not caused it to rain? Okay, because there was no one yet to work the land. And there was therefore no one to recognize the utility of rain. And so here we see, first of all, the aspect of gratitude, which some of you mentioned, and being able to recognize God did not complete the work of creation because God wanted humankind to pray in order to be answered with greenery, with things to eat.
But that's, a little contradictory because God doesn't need our prayers. The prayers are for us, they're not for God. What's
your name?
Tali.
You also look familiar. People look familiar today. So even from here. So Tali raises a very important point, which is, okay, one second. This is all nice and well, but God doesn't need our prayers. But yet, I'm going to totally challenge that notion tonight. And when we look at the Talmud and the rabbis, when they talk about prayer, pretty much all of them say that our prayers do influence God. And we have to, and so then the question for you is, if we're not able to, in some way, move God, or at least for the righteous among us, be able to move God, then, and change the decree, then why are we praying?
That's the $1,000,000 question.
That's the $1,000,000 question.
No, because people pray and bad things still happen, so.
Right.
And that's why a lot of people stop praying.
Right,
If
so.
God's not gonna answer them.
But he does answer, he just says no.
Yeah, yeah.
Praying for your kids to live where you like to see.
Yes. I think 100%, anyone who's known any level of suffering and certainly great suffering, there's zero judgment. And I think everyone in their own place, but I think that but it's very clear that the rabbis believed and felt they had to believe, and really most of Jewish thought believes that the prayer can in some way change the decree.
I heard it explained, the king wants a relationship with his son, right? So like, that's the connection we have. When we pray, that's what Hashem, that's what God wants from us, the connection. So without prayer, without asking for rain, without asking for certain things, we don't have that connection.
Yes.
It's not that it necessarily needs to hear, it just wants to hear from us. Like imagine a prince not talking to his father anymore.
Yes.
It's like, I brought you to this world, but I don't have a relationship with you because you don't care.
Yes.
And that's, I don't want that.
Yes. Jewish philosophers really grapple with this question, and they have varying degrees of how much they believe God. I mean, how much does God need our prayers? How much does God want our prayers? How much can we influence God's decisions? Just last week in the Parsha with the golden calf, there's a famous interpretation of Rashi, which says, God says to Moshe, before Moshe prays for the Jewish people to be saved, because God says, I'm going to destroy them, I'm so angry. God says to Moshe, Hanichali, leave me alone. Okay? God says, leave me alone to Moshe. But Moshe hadn't yet started pleading and praying. So normally what happens is, your child is very upset about something and they start begging you for it, right? But when you say leave me, when you say leave me alone, often we don't mean leave me alone when you're in a fight with somebody. You mean no, like listen to me, pay attention to me. So God says leave me alone, but then Moshe prays and then God changes God's mind. So that's also one of the sources of believing that prayer does have that power to a certain degree. Not to say that it always has the outcome we want, but there is the potential there. Sorry, Sima.
I might be saying something utterly outrageous, so brace yourself. To what extent, when we pray, we speak to ourselves?
So I think nothing's outrageous here. Great, I love it. Seema asked, to what extent are we speaking to ourselves? And there is that strain of thought in Jewish philosophy that we're actually not changing God, but we are changing ourselves. And that doesn't mean that you're not still praying to God, but the process of praying to God helps us become better. And that's definitely part of
At the same time, Rabbi Sachs always says that things happen for a reason that we can only understand in retrospect.
Or maybe we can't ever understand.
Yeah.
Right. Ayala, you want to say?
I mean, just to go on what you're saying, I think it's to the degree that we're in the image of God. Having a conversation with another person, maybe, why do we speak to other people? But they might not listen to us, they might not cooperate with what we're saying, but it's a relationship. They might not. I think it's to the degree that we're speaking to ourselves the way that when I have a conversation with you, I'm imagining how I would receive your words. Like we're in the image of
That's
God.
the clue to communication. It's not what you say, it's how the other person listens to you. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a mirror. It's like we're in the image of God. When we're speaking to him, we're speaking to
God and ourselves at the same time, which relates to a lot of the stuff you guys said at the beginning. Yeah. What's your name?
I'm Mandy.
Mandy.
When you want to do something, the hardest thing is not just doing something, it's deciding that you're going to do it. It's coming to that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so by praying, one of the things that pray for as well, we're asking for something out there. Whether it's a prayer that we're saying silently, but we're putting in the words. So we're deciding that we want it. And maybe by praying as well, and then God is enabling us to have the power as well to put in, whether we call it the positive energy or whether it's actually clicking in our mind, that we're going to do it. It's like there's the old joke that, you know, somebody goes to the hotel and they put a note in every day to win the lottery. And then Hashem says, "Well, please do, you know, please buy the tickets."
Yes, exactly. So you are very much in line with a famous Jewish philosopher, may he live long and be well, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who very much takes this perspective. Also, a lot of this thought really was shaped after the Shoah, because the idea that people, such, you know, wonderfully beautiful souls, perished and that the prayers didn't work is a very troubling thing. And so he says, actually, he also has an article called Why Pray? And he comes to the conclusion that we are in an era where it is about, prayer is more about influencing ourselves, more about affecting ourselves. And it's that process that does that. And if you turn to the second page, to the back, if you turn your page over for a moment. Oh, and I forgot to share my screen. I'm so sorry. Let me do that now. Feel terrible. Okay, so here I just wanted to show, you'll see there's some Hebrew letters in the middle of the page, right? Where it says Tefillah and then Pei Lamed Lamed. So the word Tefillah, prayer, comes from this root, Pei Lamed Lamed, and which means to judge, okay? It comes from the Torah and it means to judge. And the word we use for to pray, lehit palel, to pray, is, if anyone's interested in Hebrew grammar here, or in grammar in general, lehit palel is reflexive, okay? So we are in prayer judging ourselves. The word has so many layers of meaning, which is very similar to what some of you have been saying. So now,
could I just say one thing? If we're here to hear what you have to say, and every 2 minutes you're calling on somebody else over there, I didn't call to have the whole, you know, everybody say what they have to say. We want to hear what you have to say about the subject. That's the idea. No?
We're learning together, and I'm really sorry. I hope it's not too frustrating.
No, but I'm saying we turned it on to go and listen to you, but you're calling on everybody else who's giving the talk. So what's the
okay?
purpose?
Well, this is definitely meant to be interactive, so it's okay if you prefer.
Very good. Okay.
Now we're going to jump to the next source, which is the Babylonian Talmud, Brahot. Okay, Brahot. This is on the first page. It's in the box. Oh, and I actually just have to say one more thing, which is alongside the Rashi we talked about with the God wanting our prayers in order for the grass to grow. You'll see a beautiful painting here. It doesn't do it justice in the black and white. I taught this class last year, and one of my students is an artist. Her name is Leah Rab. Perhaps some of you may have heard of her. And based on our learning, she was so moved by this interpretation that she drew she painted this painting of the first man, you know, that's the first prayer. And it's really very beautiful. And you see the rain dropping down on him. And so I just said I have to bring that image here as well. Yes.
What is the meaning of praying in Hebrew as opposed to praying in a language that you can relate to and understand?
Okay, remind me your name.
Susie.
Susie is asking about praying in Hebrew. Okay, let's save that for the end, and then, but make sure I get back to it at the end. So now I want to look at a Talmudic source which talks about the origins of prayer. And now we started with Adam, so prayer goes back as early as creation of the world, meaning as early as when God created the world, God wanted there to be prayer. But what did Adam's prayer look like? We have no idea. And when we get to the Talmud, there is a big debate, a giant machloket, we say in Talmudic talk, a big debate about what is prayer derived from? How do we learn that there's a commandment, a mitzvah to pray in Judaism? So there are two opinions in source 3. The first, the Talmud likes to, by the way, the Talmud is very strongly in favor of giving credit to people for their positions. And so we have a lot of names here. You'll have to just bear with me. Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Hanina, says that prayers were instituted by the patriarchs, the Avot, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, okay? The other opinion, and we're going to flesh these out, the other opinion is that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says that the prayers are derived from the Corbanot, the sacrifices, the daily offerings in the temple. Okay, now these are two very different things. Now in the temple, they sacrificed in the morning, in the afternoon, okay? So there were daily offerings, and based on that, well, now we know that today there are three prayers a day, 3 prayers 3 times a day we pray, right? Shacharit, Mincha, and Aravit. And on Shabbat, there's an extra one. And this is exactly what was done in the temple with the sacrifices. Now, that's all well and good, but you might be just looking around the room and looking on Zoom at the faces I can see. You're probably thinking, well, that's nice, but a sacrifice? You've got to be kidding me. What on earth does that have to do with my life today? So we're going to get back to that question in a moment. But before we do, we're going to explore the first idea, which is that the prayer relates to the forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you're like me and you're thinking, oh, that's nice, there are 3 men from which we derive Tefillah from, hang tight because you'll see that women have a role as well. Okay, so the first statement is that Abraham instituted the morning prayer. So Abraham is associated with Shacharit, the morning. So I want you to think about this as we go through these ideas. Why would the Talmud say that Abraham is associated with the morning? And it gives we're now going to do a little Talmudic lingo, the verse where we learn that Abraham instituted the morning prayer, the morning service, is, now this is very interesting. Each time that the Talmud learns about prayer from each of the Avot, it uses a different word, okay? A different word for prayer, which means that when we think about prayer, there isn't one kind of prayer for everyone. There's so many different kinds of prayer. So Abraham instituted Shacharit, the morning prayer, and the verse which we learn this from says in the book of Genesis, and Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Now, we're going to explore this in a moment, but just to understand, the Talmud teaches that he stood means that standing means nothing other than prayer. Because in another verse in the Bible, we learn that standing and prayer are synonymous. In the book of Psalms, it says, and Pinchas stood up and prayed, and the plague ended. It's not so important to know that verse, but it's important to know that the Talmud connects and learns that the word standing means prayer based on connecting verses from different parts of the Bible and from Abraham. So now we're going to pause for a moment and analyze this. Why should standing mean prayer? What is standing?
Respect.
Okay, so standing is respect. Excellent. Standing is about respect for someone else, respect also for yourself, right? When people are hunched over, right? Standing, there's something about that. And in fact, one of the most fundamental prayers is called the Shmona Esrei, or the Amidah, the standing prayer. And this is very much connected to Abraham, that essential prayers. The other thing which is really interesting, yeah. Of course.
It's also about the idea that when you stand, you are in physical alignment, which is connecting to how you are supposed to.
Interesting. I have to think about that. Say that again.
When you stand,
yes.
your physical self
Okay. Exactly.
everything's open, channels, etc. So that mirrors.
Interesting. Is pointing out that standing is also, if anyone does yoga, standing is about alignment and about internally align yourself. And we're going to get back to this idea. So excellent. The other thing that I want to point out is that when is Abraham standing and praying? Now, anyone here, I don't know if anyone here loves and knows their Bible like the back of their hands, but what's happening in Genesis 19, where he rises in the morning to go back to the place where he stood before the Lord. Now, that means that yesterday he stood before the Lord and prayed to the Lord. And he came back there the next morning, okay, which means he's potentially praying again the next day. But what was that place? So that place was, shockingly, Stone, okay? Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Stone, now what happened to Stone? Stone was a city of sin, and Abraham pleaded with God. Abraham pleaded with God to save. Are there 50? If there's 50 righteous, will you spare the city? If there's 40 righteous, will you spare the city? If there's 30, right? He can't find enough righteous people for Sodom not to be destroyed. And he prays. And what happens to his prayer? Is he answered? Well, Lot and two of his daughters escaped. But in the end of the day, the city was destroyed. So everyone else was destroyed. So his prayer, as you're pointing out, was denied, meaning his request was denied, right? Moshe prays to save the Jewish people, and he's answered yes. Abraham prays to save Sodom, and the answer is no. And so I think there's something really beautiful about the Talmud bringing this as the model of prayer, the model of Abraham's prayer, a prayer which was not answered the way we want it to be, because prayer is not always going to be, it's not so simple. It's not always going to be how we want it. And I think that there's something very interesting about the rabbis feeling we're going to learn the source of prayer from someone who struggled, from someone, right, we talked about earlier on, when you suffer and you can't always feel that you can keep praying. And yet Abraham goes back there, and it's that commitment to keep praying even after the disappointment and the suffering, which is, that's real. That's really a challenge. Yes.
My name is Irene.
Irene, hi.
Paris growth. He didn't get an answer this time, or got a limited answer, but he went back again because I have to burn something.
Beautiful.
And when you have a problem or a situation in life, and it's might be shocking, and it might be difficult, I'm talking more about a medical situation, but the only thing that one of the things that I feel we have to do is to take it that God wants to help us learn something. We just have to say, wait, okay, I'm in shock, but it's a present.
Yeah.
It's a mamash present. It's something that we have to take as a gift to enable us to reach a higher level that we couldn't have done maybe without this.
Beautiful. Thank you. Irene is saying that prayer is growth and an opportunity to for God, that God is giving us to have that growth. You disagree? No, you want? No, you don't want to say, sorry. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we're going to get back to standing in a little bit, but before we do, we have to discuss Isaac and Jacob. Isaac, another word is associated with prayer for Isaac. Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer, the mincha, the afternoon prayer. And Anna's going to like this. Isaac went out to converse in the field toward evening. The Bible tells us that Isaac went out. Now what's happening? He's waiting for his bride to be brought back. Rebecca is, okay, he's waiting for Rebecca to come home, to come back and meet him. He's waiting to meet his kala, and he's outside what's called doing sicha, lasuach, which is interpreted as meditating. He's meditating. That's his prayer. His prayer is meditation. And again, the Talmud learns it from another verse. So we have to think about why Isaac is meditating, why Abraham is standing, and why Abraham is the morning and why Isaac is the afternoon. And finally, we have Jacob, who instituted the evening prayer. He institutes the evening prayer. The verse which is brought is from the famous story of Jacob happening upon a place and going to sleep on the rock and the ladder, dreaming of the ladder with the, right? So that, the word there is encounter, vaifga, okay? He reaches a place and he encounters the place. And the Bible understands that also to be, the rabbis understand that to be prayer as well. So we have Abraham standing in the morning prayer, Isaac, sicha, meditating, and the afternoon prayer. And Jacob, encounter, vaifga. The word in Hebrew also, vaifga, also is encounter. It's also a little bit of hurt in there. It's a little bit of struggle. Like chas v'chalila, pigua is a terrorist attack, right? The root is related to also a challenging encounter. And so he is the evening prayer encounter. And yes. Okay, so now we need to think about this. Why are they associated like this? Now, one thing that I really want to take away from the source, which is really such a beautiful source, is that each of the forefathers had a different type of prayer and a different way of praying and connected in a different way. And I think that that's a model for us as well in our prayers. Everyone's going to find, some people like Friday night and Kabbalat Shabbat, and some people like to go to the beach and have some meditation and say a few words. And everyone finds their different way, their different path with prayer. And that's really what modeling prayer with such diversity allows us to do. And on the other hand, the Talmud says prayer is also derived from the sacrifices. And the sacrifice, there's nothing individual about the sacrifices, right? You hear, it's really the individual character to each of the morning, the afternoon, the evening sacrifices. They're quite prescribed and automatic. And so in this Talmud, when we talk about prayer, we see really the most significant issues that arise for most people with prayer throughout history, which is prayer fixed or should prayer be spontaneous? Is prayer required or should we be able to just pray whenever we feel, I need to pray now?
Why does one have to necessarily exclude the other? Why can't it be both?
Well, that's true. It can be both. It can be both. Although you could argue that some people feel that when it's fixed, it's very hard to infuse it with meaning in the same way that when you pray, only when you feel that urge, perhaps that's what true intention in prayer is. But I think that you're right. I think the Talmud's really saying we need to find our way to both. But that's the challenge. That's one of the challenges of prayer. And I think that when we look for origins of prayer, it's beautiful to have these different possibilities. Sources which talk about influencing God, sources which talk about different character of prayer. There's one more Talmudic source, if you turn your page, that we need to look at. And soon we'll be wrapping up. And this is from the source for the Talmud in Tractate Ta'anit. Here, the Talmud quotes a verse from the Shema prayer, which we're going to be talking about in further weeks. And it says, we say in the Shema.
Can you put it on the screen here, please? The second one.
Sorry, yes, thank you. This is my multitasking at 9 p.m. is a little. Thank you. Thank you, Ricky. So
you're very welcome.
Love it. So the Talmud in Ta'anit tells us that when we say in the Shema, La'ahava et Hashem Elokeichem u'la'avdo b'chol levavchem, to love God and to serve Him with all of your hearts. What does it mean, says the Talmud, when we say service of the heart? What's service of the heart? Now, you need to know that service, Avodah, is the other word for sacrifice. So here we again have this challenge in the sources. They're struggling. You feel the rabbis struggling with this notion. Avodah, right, on Yom Kippur, we also have a part of the service called the Avodah, which is based on the sacrifices. So we have this, it's service. Prayer is service. It's serving God. On the other hand, it has to be from the heart. From the heart. And so the Talmud tells us, what is service of God performed in the heart? This is prayer. Prayer needs to find some combination, some balance between service. I have to get up in the morning and I have to go to work and I have to take care of my children and I have to do all these things. But I also want to find the heart in it. And the same thing is true for prayer. And so this is what the Talmud, sorry? Exactly, with all your heart and all your soul. That's right. That's right. So you see that all these sources are really understanding that prayer is going to be complicated for people and they're going to need inspiration. The other thing I want to say, which I forgot to say in the beginning, is when I teach, I've been teaching about prayer for the past few years to some different groups. And I really like to say that I find that when I teach and study these sources, that's when my prayer is feeling most successful in the way of me feeling good about it. Meaning, I think that we all, like with everything else in our lives, if we want to feel, that we're thinking about eating healthy in our health, we like to read and contemplate and think about that or other things that we're interested in. And so it's true with prayer as well, that together, I don't hold myself up here as someone who knows how to pray best or better or anything, but I know that for myself, when I explore these sources, it really helps me feel more connected. It infuses it with meaning. So now I want to point out one other, okay, so first of all, I want to turn to source 7, which is at the bottom of page 2, to get back to something Anna said. When we talk about Abraham as standing in prayer, we talked about standing as a certain body language connoting respect and alignment.
Share screen, please.
I'm getting there, thank you. Okay. So I want to share with you this short piece from Rabbi Cook, who was a chief rabbi of Israel. and see what he says. He says something really beautiful. And I think that this also prayer, we're going to talk next week a little bit also about prayer and emotional well-being. And here, I think that this idea of standing in prayer, the parts where we stand, there is something going on between the external being a mirror of the internal. And so Rav Kook says in source 7, the prostration, now here he's talking about when we bow down and when we stand up in prayer. The prostration symbolizes subjugation of the negative qualities within the personality. They are best dealt a quick, decisive blow like the snap of a stick. So it's interesting, the Talmud says that when one bows, we're supposed to bow down quickly, but then rise up slower, okay? Which is interesting, right? And so Rav Kook is explaining that we want to, when we bow down, we are humbling ourselves. And we want to do that quite quickly. We want to just get rid of all the bad stuff, right? The stuff we're feeling badly about. And then when we stand up, okay, elevation, spiritual ascent, on the other hand, is gradual. This growth is an arduous, at times serpentine process that requires time and patience. And I think that this imagery is very powerful for today as well, where we have so many people struggling with emotional issues, mental health issues. I think that thinking about prayer also as a coping mechanism, as a way to, as many of you said, work on ourselves, think of our self-worth. When we bow down, but then when we stand back up again, it's a moment also to reflect that we are in the image of God and that we have worth. We each have worth, and we each have what to say and what words of value. So that's Rav Kook. There's one other thing I want to get into, which is that we saw a few sources from the Talmud that described where prayer comes from. However, what happened was over time, the Jewish law developed, and after the destruction of the temple, prayer becomes very much more standardized and ritualized. And this happens with a lot of Jewish law, that people needed structure, people needed things clear cut. People needed, and this also gets into the language issue that was raised here, people needed the prayers clear to them because they didn't know what to pray. They didn't know how to pray. They didn't know where and when to pray. And so there's a interesting debate between two of the greatest medieval Jewish thinkers. We call them in Hebrew Rambam and Ramban, Rambam being Maimonides and Ramban being Nachmanides. Rambam, the Maimonides, believes that prayer, the basis of prayer is in the Bible, that the Bible requires us to pray once a day. Okay, now that doesn't, according to the Bible, it's not that you have to pray 3 times a day. You have to pray at least 1 time a day from the Bible, whether you feel the need or don't feel the need. Nachmanides, Ramban, says, no, the Bible only commands us to pray in time of need, okay? And so when there's a time, what he calls tsa'ar, like Ayala said, desperation. And beyond that, now, both of these great rabbis will agree that in a post-biblical period, rabbinically, meaning Jewish law still expects people to pray more than once a day and every day. But on a biblical level, the basis, the most original layer of what was expected, why should we pray? And here we see again in the medieval period, the same thing going on that we saw in the Talmud, which is, should prayer be something commitment and structure and expected all the time, right? Day in, day out, morning, afternoon, evening. Or should prayer be something which really just comes fully from the heart, only when we truly need to, out of time of desperation? And so we see this tension continues throughout the sources. I'm going to close with one source, which is the last source. And this is just to spend we really focused on the idea of the forefathers, but I want to also focus on the idea of the sacrifices. Now, of course, we don't want to go back to a world of sacrifices anytime soon, but Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a more modern interpreter, modern being the modern period, not today, explains what it means, what the word Corban, sacrifice, means, okay? And this relates to prayer. So he says in source 8, karev means to approach, to come near. And so to get into a close relationship with somebody, this at once most positively gives the idea of the object and purpose of the process of Corban, of sacrifice, as the attainment of a higher sphere of life. The person desires that something of himself should come closer to God. And that is what Corban is. Why is this significant? Because we see that in the Talmud, there's also this idea of modeling after the temple in service. And so Rav Hirsch is saying, even in a time when we don't have the temple anymore, we can draw meaning from what was done historically. And so for this reason, we see that the Talmud feels that there's something significant about how things were done in the temple and how we want to continue them through today. I have to say that I have one student who, when I studied the source with her, said she had stopped going to synagogue on Shabbat, and she was like, kind of totally not going. And she absolutely fell in love with this source and felt this idea of karev, of finding a way to draw closer, really spoke to her, and she started to go. And I believe even now, even through Corona, she kept it up. It's interesting. You never know what piece is going to speak to people. So I'm done with my presenting here, but I'm very happy to stay and talk and continue the conversation for anyone who'd like to. And I thank everyone for joining us. And I hope that was okay for everyone on Zoom. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Okay, Susie asked about language and prayer. And this is actually discussed in the sources. There are certain things, for the most part, the position is that you should, it's more important to have intention in prayer than to necessarily say the words in Hebrew. And so if you're going to understand them better and have more heartfelt prayer in English, then it makes sense. I have to, well, I'm going to talk about this in week 3, so hang on, but let's say this, I'll get back to it. But there are certain prayers like Shema where we want to say the actual first line or first paragraph if we can. But in general, it's important to understand what we're saying.
The reason I asked you this question is the time of year that I feel most connected to prayer, and not to God because I feel connected all the time, is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that's the time that I really want to understand what I'm saying. On Shabbos, I pray, it's more rote, I go fast, the constant doctrine is much quicker than I can catch up. And so, but on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I find that what I'm saying is so poetic, and it's so beautiful, and it's so fluid, and it connects my neshama in a way that it wouldn't connect if I just read it. I understand some of it.
Yes.
But, if you're talking about connection to God, I think you have to really find something in what you're saying
Most
that connects
definitely.
you to the source.
Most definitely.
And more than that, I find that my prayer is much more profound for me in my connection to God when I sit on my terrace and I look out and I look up to God. And I speak to him every morning, and I say what I have to say. And that to me is a much more profound prayer than saying words chocolate that I really don't connect with.
Yes. And there is source for that in the sources. So definitely, I think, let me get back to hopefully in week 3, when we talk about commitment and kavanah, intention, let me try and think about a little bit more about the language issue. Yeah.
So I agree with Susie. It just seems like I always had a problem with the prayers and the Siddur, and it just seems so robotic. I just feel like are you really putting any meaning to it? You're just saying somebody else's words, I really I connect to nature, just like Susie connects to, she goes out, she sees this beautiful view and she can connect. I just feel like it just makes so much more sense, but like you said, everyone connects in a different way.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you, I know there's, because you said that, having 3 times a day as a set time, as opposed to praying spontaneously. Men are more bound by time, right?
Right. I'll talk about women in the 4th week. I mean, we'll talk about women throughout. Yes. Okay. So next time I'm talking about in class 2, I'm going to talk about moda'ani and gratitude, expressing gratitude. And we're going to get into also a little bit of well-being stuff, prayer and well-being. The 3rd week, we're talking about the Shema prayer and intention, kavanah, commitments. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Someone mentioned here the father-son relationship between God and Jewish people. This is going to give you a very different picture, more of a loving relationship. And the final week is going to be women and Tefillah, sort of what is our place and what is women's place in prayer, and that's going to be very interesting as well. I want to let people go. I do want to say there is, even though it's so important to find ways to connect, I think there's also something to be said for the words of prayer themselves. And even if you don't connect with all of it, if there's some way to find bits and pieces that, like the Shema, or next week you'll see the Moda Ani, where we wake up and it's the first words we say, thanking God. We're going to talk about that. I think there's also something to be said for saying words that have been said by the Jewish people for many, many, many thousand
You know,
years.
so I think would be a good idea as well. If we could have some sheets, you know what you do? If you email everybody the sheets.
Okay.
When you can learn from, and then, you know, we could have the sheet, even if you come to the shiur, or if you don't. Because
Okay.
the week after, I won't be able to come because I've got to Hilling that night, so.
Also
Yes.
prayer. Okay,
Yeah.
so send the sheet before, for sure, we'll do.
Yes, it's a good idea, because that was interesting, you know, and if you have the sheets to look at.
Excellent, definitely, we'll definitely do that.
Yeah, it's a good idea,
Thank you, Valerie.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna shut down the Zoom. Is that good, Shoshan? Okay. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. I love your parents. They're great.
Oh, thank you.
Love from Ricky and Jeff.
I will definitely tell them. Thank you.
One of the things that